So today's example is about John Blunt. This is the example in the book, and it's quite a nice example the way he shows how we are quite short-sighted, especially when it comes to money, and how even very logical, very rational, intelligent people can also be short-sighted, especially when it involves money. So I'll begin. John Blunt was an Englishman, and in I think it was the 1700s, he first noticed some news about a company in Paris. Now you have to remember, at the time, England and France, they were not on very good terms. They were enemies. And so John Blunt was very jealous about what was happening in Paris. At the time, the French were having an economic boom. Their economy was doing very, very well. The reason why was there was a man named John Law. And John Law had decided to sell shares in the Mississippi Company. Now, a little bit of background here. John Law had decided that the Mississippi Company was going to become extremely rich and powerful because they were doing some business in America. France was trying to trade with America, and there was a lot of resources. There were a lot of amazing things that they could get from America and sell. And so John Law had decided that he was going to sell shares of this company because the company was eventually going to be very rich and wealthy, and the people who own shares, right? The people who invested in the company could buy these shares, and as the price went up, they could eventually sell the shares and make more money as the company became more and more profitable. So this man, John Blunt, was jealous because he realized that their enemy, France, their economy was doing well because they were selling these shares in this company, and it was doing very well. More and more people, not just from France, but from all over Europe, were investing in this company, and it was really, really a successful venture. John Blunt was also very worried because if France's economy improved, France would become more powerful than England, and if the two countries had another war, England would have to worry. Lewis.
就是有一个人他去法国，然后他发现法国经济非常的好，他就很嫉妒。在那个时候，英国和法国关系不是很好，就他们是敌人。然后就是法国为什么经济这么好呢？是因为他们这个叫 John Blunt 的人，他在密西西比什么公司在卖椅子的，然后他一开始因为那个密西西比公司跟美国有一个什么合作之类的什么的，然后他就买了一个股份吧，就是入股，然后等那个公司怎么说呢，有收益的时候，他就能够把那个股份转卖，然后就来卖钱，就很多人都这么做，所以他就是他那个经济就很繁荣，他就那个英国人就很担心，因为如果要再打仗的话，他们就打不赢法国人了，对，然后就是这样，应该是这样。OK, finish.
So many people from France were becoming richer and richer because they would buy shares in this company and sell the shares, and in fact there were many new millionaires in France at the time. So John Blunt had decided, now John Blunt was the director of the South Sea Company. This was a company established in England, and the purpose of the company was to manage all of the trade between England and South America. And so John Blunt had learned what John Law was doing in France, and he decided that he had to do something similar in England. And he decided that this would be a great way for the English people to become rich and powerful as well. So he came up with an interesting scheme. Oh, before I go into that, I should tell you that the South Sea Company, yes, they were established as a trading company. They were supposed to handle all of the trade with South America, but they didn't actually do any trading. They were just kind of like a bank. The England and the English people used this company as a bank, a kind of bank. So his idea, John Blunt had an amazing idea. He decided that he was going to buy the English debt. At the time, England had borrowed a lot of money because they had to fight wars with Spain and France, and the country was in debt. They owed the people a lot of money. And so John Blunt had this idea that he was going to buy all of the debt from the English government, and the government would give the South Sea Company a small interest, a small percentage every year. And then he was going to sell shares from the South Sea Company, and he was going to allow anybody in England to buy shares. And his idea was that because the South Sea Company was going to trade with South America, they would earn more money, there would be a lot more resources, and the value of the South Sea Company would rise. So the people who were buying shares from the South Sea Company would also be able to sell their shares in the future and earn a lot more money. Lewis.
就是这个 John Blunt 他看到那个法国他也在搞这个东西，然后他也想要英国搞这个，然后他看到一个因为他是那个 director 是啥？就是导演，应该不是导演，就是主理人吧，应该是，就是这个 South Sea Company 的一个主理人。我也不知道啥意思，就应该就是管这个的，然后他就跟那个美国也有合作，然后他就想的是先借贷，然后搞这个，好像是借贷搞这个公司吧，然后再让所有人可以去买这个股份，买了股份，然后再转卖出去，然后就可以卖很多钱，就像法国一样，然后就没有然后了。就是他想故技重施，他要跟法国一样，就是他想让英国经济也起来，这样打仗就不会输。对，大概就是这样。
So he had this idea. Now he had to talk to King George. So at the time, King George was the leader of England, and if John Blunt wanted this idea to become real, he had to convince King George. King George had two very big problems, and John Blunt decided that he would solve King George's two problems. The first one was that King George was very, very unhappy that England had so much debt, that they had borrowed so much money, and that they owed so much money to different people. That was one of his big problems. The second problem was that King George was very unpopular, one of the most unpopular kings in England. Most people did not like him. There were many different reasons which I'm not going to discuss. But John Blunt decided that if he would agree, if King George would agree with his idea to start to sell shares, to allow people to buy shares of the South Sea Company and make more and more people rich, that people would, first of all, be happier, and maybe they would like King George more because he approved of John Blunt's idea. And the second way was that the South Sea Company was going to buy all of the debt from England, which means that King George, the country, England, would not have much debt. So these were two problems that John Blunt convinced King George, and King George agreed. Lewis.
就是如果这个 John Blunt 他想要搞这个东西的话，他就得先得到当时的国王的同意。然后当时国王有两个问题，第一个问题是他第一个问题是他欠了很多债，就是他从就是人民那边就是收刮很多钱用来打仗，对西班牙那些打仗，然后就欠了很多债。第二个是因为他很不受那些人的欢迎，就是因为我也不知道为什么，就是他就是不受英国人的欢迎，所以他很不开心。然后他那个 John Blunt 他如果想要搞这个计划的话，他就要就是说服这个国王。然后他是这样想，他是如果说这个公司能够成功运营的话，他就那些人就可以，就是那些欠钱的人就可以买他的股份，然后就可以盈利，然后就不会再欠钱。然后并且盈利的话，英国经济也会上来，然后上来以后人民就又会喜欢这个国王，然后国王就同意了。对，就是这样。然后 finish。Done.
In the beginning, John Blunt wanted to make sure that more and more people would know about this offer, that they could buy shares. And so what he did was he started to give shares to some of the wealthiest, the richest people in England. Because the South Sea Company was a very big company, he had managed to, he had created these relationships with many rich people in England. So when he decided to sell shares, he first started to give some shares to these rich people for free, to make sure that they would start talking about it and more people would become interested in the South Sea Company. And so when they started selling South Sea Company shares, they started selling it in a place called Exchange Alley. Exchange Alley is kind of like, at that time, it was the stock market of England. And so when they started selling shares, Exchange Alley became very busy. Lots and lots of people started to come and buy these shares. There were rumors that the South Sea Company was going to begin trading with South America, and because of this, more people could see that the company was going to become big and successful, and if they bought shares now, that the prices would go up and they could sell their shares and earn money. And it did happen. More and more people started talking about the shares. More and more people started spreading rumors about South Sea Company. And more people started buying and buying and buying. And eventually the price rose. He initially started selling the shares for £100. And then the price went to £200, and then £300, and then £400. The price just kept rising as more and more people heard the news about the South Sea Company, the rumors about how successful it was going to be, and the price kept rising. Lewis.
就是这个策略，就是先给一些就是很有钱的人，然后这个股份，然后让他们就是去谈论这件事情，然后说着其他有钱人也知道了， 然后其他有钱人知道以后，大家都知道，就是有钱人都持有这个股份，然后自己也想要，就是像他那样子，然后也去买那个股份，然后对，然后他这时候又散布那个谣言嘛，就是说说他们怎么跟那个南美那边合作，然后他们的那个公司的那个名声就越来越大，然后那个股票也卖的越来越多，然后越贵，对，就是这样。OK，finish。
So, in the beginning, rich people started buying shares in the South Sea Company. And then some of the famous people, like the actors, the musicians, the writers, they started buying shares in the South Sea Company. And then eventually more and more of the normal people, the farmers, the drivers, the business people started buying shares in the South Sea Company. And that's why the price kept rising. There was more and more and more demand for the shares. So it made the share value higher. More people wanted them. Eventually, there was a huge boom economy in England. The economy was doing so well. People were spending money because they could see that they were going to become rich. They were becoming richer and richer. Some people bought shares and sold their shares 1 month later and made huge profits. They started buying houses. The people who already had houses would break down their houses and build bigger houses. People started throwing amazing, huge parties. People started retiring because they were so rich from these investments in the South Sea Company. The economy was doing very, very well. But then, as the price kept rising, eventually it got to £1,000. John Blunt had to make sure that the price kept rising, and he started to offer more and more deals. Like, if you spend £100 now, you can pay the rest of the £1,000 over the next 5 years. We will give you credit. We will let you buy it over time. And it became easy for anybody to buy these kinds of shares. But a few people became a little suspicious. They were worried about how could a company keep on offering such amazing deals for its shares. It wasn't even really trading. Those were just rumors. It wasn't really trading with South America. It didn't really have very much. How did the price keep rising? So some people became a little suspicious and they decided to sell their shares and buy land, because land is always a safe investment. They bought houses, they bought land. But around the same time, the man who first began in France, the guy whose name was John Law, that man, his company, the company he started, it started to have problems, and many of the French people were dissatisfied with the company and sold their shares, and many people in France lost money. And suddenly the French economy was in a recession. The economy started to get smaller and smaller. People were not spending very much money because they realized that that company was not very successful. And so John Blunt realized that this would probably happen in England as well, especially if the share prices stopped rising. People would stop investing. They would start selling their shares. And this is exactly what people did. After the French economy got into a recession, more and more people realized that this was not real. The share prices there was something wrong with this company. It was unexplainable how the value could be so high. And so more and more people started selling off their shares in the South Sea Company. John Blunt did not know what to do. He could not keep the share price rising. Lewis.
就是一开始是一些就是有钱人有这个股份嘛，然后后面就是一些名流就开始，比如说明星啊，明星就开始买这个股份，然后再到后来就是普通人都开始买这个股份，然后所有人都在买这个股份，然后英国的那个经济也确实是突然好，就很多人就是买了这个股份，然后1个月以后卖出去，他就赚了很多，就是这个股价就越来越高。然后他卖出去了以后，就很多人就开始就是什么搞大房子啊，然后就是退休啊干嘛的，就是经济看起来挺繁荣的。然后但是后来突然那个法国的那个一开始搞的这个卖股份的这个公司，它突然出现了问题。然后呢然后很多人都已经把在法国很多人都把股份那个卖出去了。然后那个Blunt 他就觉得英国也会发生这样的事情，然后他是干嘛来着？他干啥？他就我忘了，反正就是然后后面就是很多人他都把那个股份卖出去，然后那个股票就没办法，股份就股票不知道就没办法涨了，然后没办法涨了就出现问题。然后就有就是大家都不知道他那个钱到底怎么升上去的，就是因为他其实并不是真的在跟那个南美有合作，他只是一个谣言，在散布这个谣言。然后所有人都把那个股份卖出去，然后换了土地那些的，然后那个更保险嘛，然后那个股份就不再上升了，然后就出现问题了，然后就没了，就掉了。OK, finish.
All right. So John Blunt became desperate. People were selling shares from the company and the price started going down. When the price started falling, more people started panicking, and John Blunt decided to offer lower prices, better deals, more credit. He tried to do everything to encourage more people to continue buying so the price would rise. But a lot of people had realized that this was not a good investment. And a lot of people lost money. People started selling their shares because they wanted cash, they wanted gold, they wanted anything that was real. And the Bank of England nearly ran out of money because they had to give so much cash to people selling their shares. The English economy was really, really badly affected by this. The problem here was that John Blunt was extremely short-sighted. He realized that the only way that people would become rich and that he would become rich was if the price kept rising. But he didn't think about how he could keep making the price rise. It was almost impossible. He refused to look at the future. He didn't look very carefully at the company that began in Paris. He was very short-sighted. If he had just waited a few months, he would have seen that that company in Paris had exactly the same problems, and that company destroyed the French economy. But because he was unwilling to look at the future, all he could focus on was getting rich now and making other people rich now. So many people lost money. The price of those shares went down. It became worthless. Those shares could not be sold at the end. Even people who are even very rational, very intelligent people. For example, Isaac Newton. Newton is one of the most famous scientists in the world, and at that time, he also decided to invest in the South Sea Company, and he lost so much money. He must have lost £20,000. Many people committed suicide when they realized that they had lost all of their money. And somebody even tried to kill John Blunt. And John Blunt had to run away from London and hide in a small town for the rest of his life. He lost all of his money. Lewis.
就是他那个股票没办法涨了以后，就很多人他都想要去信息，他想要看到的就是实际的钱，因为他们觉得这个东西有风险了开始。然后那个银行那个所有的储存那些金库里面那些钱就全部都被取光了，然后经济就受到了很大的影响。所以说这个 John Blunt 是一个非常短视的人，因为他如果再等，他对目光短浅的人，差不多直译过来，就是如果他再等几个月，就会看到法国那家这样子做的公司它就倒闭了，法国经济也被影响了，然后他这样子的话就会导致很多人都就是损失了很多，就连就是那时候一个什么很有名的科学家，好像叫 Isaac Newton 不知道，是这个吗？牛顿吗？然后就损失了很多钱，然后好惨啊！然后很多人都自杀，因为他们没有钱了。然后还有人想要杀 John Blunt， 因为就是这个家伙搞的鬼。然后他就只能逃离伦敦，然后藏在一个小地方，然后就是永远出不来，好惨啊！如果他再等几个月的话，他就会知道，就是法国的这个方法是行不通的。对 ，finish。
So, thank you. So in this example, we are seeing the law of short-sightedness in action. It does not matter how intelligent you are. When even very intelligent people realize that maybe this was not a very good investment, they still saw that other people around them were investing money and actually making lots of money. They knew that this was unrealistic. But you remember, a few weeks ago we discussed group bias. We don't think for ourselves when we are in a group. We tend to just follow what the group decides. We become emotional, we become irrational. And so very intelligent people invested money and lost money because they were short-sighted. They wanted to become rich very quickly. They wanted instant gratification. Knowing that this was a bad investment did not stop them. And in the end, they lost lots of money. Now this can happen to anyone. Of course, this is an example of one of the biggest and one of the worst situations that happened in England, where so many rational, intelligent people were short-sighted. But this can happen in any situation, even in our daily lives. We often do not want to look a few months down into the future. We prefer to just focus on what is going to happen now, what we can gain now. Lewis.
就连那些很聪明的那些人，他们其实都被就是在这一次这个大投资中损失了金钱，因为我们之前有讲过，人如果在一个群体中， 很难做出一些就是很理智的判断，就是随大流了。然后就算他们知道是这个有可能是一个非常就是不是很好的一个投资，可能会亏损，他们还是就是随大流，就是去投了钱，最后还是被亏得很惨。然后还有个啥？还有个啥？他讲了啥呀？就是那些很聪明的人，他们在那个集体中就变得不会思考了，因为他们看到就大家都很快的能够获得利益，然后他们就也投钱进去，然后也想要很快的获得利益，就是就是思考当下的事情，并没有去往长远的那个地方去想，所以就损失了金钱。对，刚才就是这个。finish。